Hello everyone, and welcome to the stream today. Cloudflare claims that its mission is to build a better internet, and yet it's done the exact opposite of that by supporting hate sites that intimidate marginalized people from participating in the public sphere of the internet, as well as from safely existing in the real world. Today we're going to be breaking down the various categories of service that Cloudflare provides, and give you some alternatives to each category and concrete steps that you can take to migrate your services. We'll also be discussing how to write a business case and rationale, how to persuade your decision makers, and how to actually carry out the proof of concept if it's not just you for a hobby project and it's a larger organization. To recap why this campaign is going on, in parts 1 and 2 of this series, we covered how Cloudflare has, for almost the past decade, shamelessly proxied content for KiwiFarms, which is a hate site dedicated to harassing transgender and autistic people out of existence. However, it's growing into a problem not just for trans people, but also for Jewish people, Muslim people, Latinx people, and more. Right now, as of this moment, KiwiFarms hosts the Christchurch and Buffalo mass shooting manifestos and first-person videos from the shooter. And this is proxied and cached and enabled by Cloudflare. KiwiFarms' members ruthlessly torment their targets until they suffer extreme mental duress, lose their jobs and housing, and unfortunately, there are 3 victims that we know of that have committed suicide because they could not see any way out of KiwiFarms' harassment. It's very sad for me to be getting to this point to discuss this because originally I wanted to implore Cloudflare to just do the right thing and drop KiwiFarms. But unfortunately, we've given them a full week to do that, and they haven't given even us the dignity of acknowledging our concerns and saying that they have a response. So instead, today we're going to be talking not just about dropping KiwiFarms, but about dropping Cloudflare. My name is Liz, and I appreciate your attention today, and I also appreciate if you've been listening throughout this week or listening to the videos recorded on demand. I'm a software developer like many of you, and for the past 5 years, I've been a professional educator on everything cloud, DevOps, and large-scale systems. So as you can see, cloud systems that enable distribution of content, scalability, and reliability, things like Cloudflare, these are well in my wheelhouse of expertise and coverage. I also happen to be transgender, and my life has been negatively impacted by Cloudflare's actions here. So I'm not asking you for money. Thank you for everyone who's already more than covered the captioning costs for the whole week. Thank you, thank you. I did put something in the chat for being able to give money directly to Trans Lifeline, though, given that that's how I got embroiled in this whole mess, was expressing support for Trans Lifeline. So if you feel particularly moved that you don't want KiwiFarms' efforts to get me to shut up about Trans Lifeline to succeed, maybe kick a few dollars over to Trans Lifeline. And also, I already have plenty large of an audience. I have plenty big of a platform. I'm not really seeking to grow my platform here. I'm just trying to utilize it for the better good. And I do have to say, I really do mean that, there's nothing to personally gain, and I have lost nights of sleep. I've definitely had death threats sent to me. I've had all kinds of awful transphobic slurs sent to me. This has been a really rough time for me, and I really hope that this is going to be worth it in terms of the awareness that I'm raising about this issue and applying pressure to Cloudflare's bottom line to make sure that they are going to do the right thing. So, given that Cloudflare is refusing to take any action so far, the next action that I'd like to have happen is to make sure that anyone who uses Cloudflare as a customer is aware of what they're supporting by giving Cloudflare their money or by allowing Cloudflare to intermingle their traffic with KiwiFarms' traffic. I don't want Cloudflare to be able to continue to profit from being the least ethical CDN or edge services provider. And I don't want innocent websites to unknowingly be acting as a shield for KiwiFarms' traffic. So today we're going to be talking about several things. First of all, we're going to talk about how to identify, at least at a first pass, whether your own site, your employer site, or a site that you use is hosted or proxied by Cloudflare. Secondly, we'll be talking about, for hobbyist projects or smaller scale projects, what the alternatives are to the various elements of Cloudflare's free and paid tiers, and alternative products for each of the functionality pieces that are provided by that free tier or by their add-ons. And then finally, we'll talk about, if you can't migrate, if you really want to continue using Cloudflare's free tier, how can you make it as expensive as possible for them to provide you with that service, so that you're not just being a human shield and not costing them something. Finally, we're going to talk about how to build the business case and how to persuade your leadership that this is a challenge that is worth taking on to switch your infrastructure off of Cloudflare. What some of the risks are, yes, but what the benefits are going to be to your company if you divest yourself from such an unethical service provider. And then at the very end, what we'll do is we'll spend some time working through some live tutorials that some of the providers that I will be mentioning have set up to show you how to migrate things. Because that way you can see for yourself how easy it really is, and also how much support is available from the ecosystem if you choose to go that way. So that's what our agenda for today is going to be. Also, I'd like to offer a brief thank you to my moderators, those who are anonymous and those who are here under their full names, and also to our anonymous captioner who is making sure that this stream is accessible to people with audio processing problems or who are deaf. So let's start with the basics. How do you know whether you or someone or a site that you're working with is supporting Cloudflare? So let's go ahead and pop open my screen here. And I've made it nice and big so that anyone should hopefully be able to see what I'm doing. So what I'm going to do here is first I'm going to show that indeed KiwiFarms is currently proxied by Cloudflare despite the fact that they're down. So I'm going to do a couple of things. First of all, I want to find out where the KiwiFarms.net domain is registered. So I'm going to run whoiskiwifarms.net from my Unix console. And what will pop up is that KiwiFarms.net, the register whois server is whois.cloudflare.com, and the registrar URL is cloudflare.com. So that shows that the domain name, that the services mapping the domain name to the DNS servers are being done by Cloudflare. So let's do another check, because these are all incremental things, right? Like, this is not a package deal. You don't have to do all of these things together. So let's suppose that I wanted to find out who the domain name servers are for KiwiFarms. So if I type dig-tns kiwifarms.net, then it will show that it is that two Cloudflare servers, paul.ns and serena.ns on cloudflare.com, are providing the name service resolutions. And if I go a step further and ask to resolve the A or the quad A for it, what we'll see is we'll get a number of IP addresses that are corresponding with the immediate kind of first hop when you go to talk to KiwiFarms. So I can also do the same thing for quad A, but let's focus on regular IPv4. So if I do a whois on that IP, I will get the ownership of that IP block. Which backend provider is responsible for serving the packets on that individual IP block. And what we'll see right there is indeed this IP range belongs to the Cloudflare backend network, and that Cloudflare backend network is then providing denial of service, caching services, and many of the other things that we're going to be talking about today. So that's how to tell if something is clearly utilizing Cloudflare services. Let's take an example of a site that I know for sure is not using any Cloudflare. So let's use, for instance, my employer, Honeycomb. So let's do the first couple of checks, right? Whoishoneycomb.io. And you'll see that the registrar here is Gandhi, which is one of the registrars that I'm going to be recommending as one of many possible options you might use. And if I ask for who is providing DNS services, what you'll see is that AWS is providing the DNS services for Honeycomb.io. And finally, if I do dig-ta honeycomb.io, I'll see a bunch of IP addresses, and if I run a whois on them, what we'll see is that those IP addresses belong to Amazon. So that's basically a really quick rundown of how you can quickly figure out those first layers of the stack: who the registrar is, who the DNS provider is, and who the actual first hop IP host of the domain is. So if you're trying to investigate where something is hosted, for instance, there were some questions earlier that I think came up on my Twitter about where is Reddit hosted, right? So we can pretty easily answer that by checking whoisreddit.com, and we'll see that Reddit, I think, is MarkMonitor. Yep, Reddit is registered by MarkMonitor, and also you can see that Reddit's DNS is AWS. And finally, we can see that that Reddit has a set of IP addresses, and if I whois those IP addresses, what we get is Fastly, which again is one of Cloudflare's competitors and one of the providers that I will recommend among many other potential providers. So that's how to figure out, in the case of KiwiFarms, they are protected top to bottom by Cloudflare, mainly because they can't find any provider that wants to provide those services to them. Their previous domain registrar was DreamHost, but DreamHost cut them off, so they had to go to Cloudflare to provide their domain registration. But it is mix and match. So what should you consider when you're deciding to divest off of Cloudflare? So if you're running your own, site firsthand, you probably know whether you already have a Cloudflare account. But if this is kind of your nonprofit or some other organization, this is a way of figuring out who is actually behind it. So if your organization is not particularly complex, what I would recommend is if you're just using something that is like a blog, like something that's maybe WordPress, I would recommend WordPress Engine or WP Engine. Here, I'll bring it up on screen. So WP Engine are actually the folks that we at Honeycomb use for our marketing site. It works great. It's hosted on Google Cloud Platform. I would not recommend paying for their advanced denial of service protection because WP Engine, unfortunately today, uses Cloudflare to provide that service. But certainly, I might ask my colleagues, I do have a conflict of interest, but I might ask my colleagues to write a letter to WP Engine asking, hey, are you going to offer any alternatives for denial of service providers? Basically, the less infrastructure you have to run yourself, the better. So, don't run your whole stack just because. If you can find a provider to do it, just do it. Similarly, someone wrote into my Twitter, I think yesterday or day before, saying that they were running their own media wiki. And they basically realized that instead of running their own media wiki and kind of having Cloudflare do the domain registration, having Cloudflare do all of the denial of service protection, they'd rather just hand it to a dedicated media wiki provider. They could just upload and dump all of their wiki pages, and they wouldn't have to worry about running the server or any of the other things that would just be handled for them. If your site is not necessarily a blog, but is instead something that can be served relatively simply with flat pages, another alternative that I might recommend is Github Pages. So for instance, let me bring this up for a second. So if I go to www.ofsoundmind.com, which is my EVE Alliance, so this is a relatively simple static page. And if I go over here to investigate where it's hosted, what you'll find out is that we are running it off of a Google Cloud domain, and it turns out that the backend of this is proxying to GitHub. So if I go to github.com/eval, what you can see is we have a configuration here for what our static web page is, and it's just literally a set of HTML files, right? That it's just a set of things that we trust GitHub to run however they need to run. And what happens is whenever something pushes to the main branch, it'll just automatically update the content that appears there. So it takes a lot of that work out of it. I don't have to worry about juggling servers. I don't have to worry about anything else. And all of the kind of protection against denial of service is handled by GitHub's upstream denial of service. Although now I do wonder who is GitHub's denial of service provider, but these are all things we can answer, right? So github.com, there's an IP address. So let's find out who owns that. Right, so we can see that GitHub just directly handles its own denial of service protection. It doesn't outsource to any third-party provider. At least that's super visible. There are also other interesting providers. For instance, there are Vercel and Netlify, who kind of specialize in what's called the Jamstack. I know it's a confusing name, but it is literally spelled like this, Jamstack. So if you run a Jamstack application, do check out Netlify and Vercel. And finally, if you are not, if you're not technical in any way, number one, I don't know why you would have a Cloudflare account in the first place, but just in case, you can always use Squarespace. So for instance, right, so lizthegray.com turns out to be registered through Google Domains, and if I do a dig on lizthegray.com, you'll see that's hosted with Squarespace, and you can see that, yep, right there, right, like it is hosted on Squarespace, which doesn't obviously at least appear to be using either Fastly or Cloudflare as their provider. So Squarespace, I think, is kind of a great drag and drop option for I just want to put together the building blocks of my website. So for instance, let me just show you what that looks like. I'm not going to I'm not going to give you a referral code or anything like that. I'm not being sponsored by and like some influencers that I know, I'm not being sponsored by Squarespace. I just happen to think that their stuff is pretty rad. So if I punch that in, so what you can see there is I basically have this nice drag and drop interface for being able to edit all these things. I don't have to worry about, number one, I don't have to worry about someone trying to knock my site off the web. I don't have to worry about the bandwidth costs. Squarespace just rolls that into their monthly fee. And I can put whatever I need here, whether it be an archive of all of my previous talks or things like that. So basically, don't overcomplicate things. Use all-in-one hosting if you absolutely can, because that will just make your life so much easier. But if for whatever reason you don't want to entrust your domain registration to Squarespace, right? Like, I certainly don't want to, have all of my stuff locked behind Squarespace. The thing that I recommend is at least having control of your own domain. So if you are currently using Cloudflare's free plan, where they offer, domain registration, they might charge you $10 or whatever for domain registration, you can also get domain registration and privacy protection for the same price from basically any other domain registrar out there. So over here, let me show you an example of how that's set up. And just in case people are wondering, this is where I used to live. The people who live there have nothing to do with me. Please don't harass them. They are nice people. And this might look like a self-dox. This is Earth class mail. Like, Earth class mail intercepts any mail that comes to me. So I don't regard this as a security risk to show on screen. So we look at the config for lizthegray.com. We can see that it actually has built-in integration with Squarespace. So it basically is just automatically configured. And if I look at the DNS for this, right, you can see that that DNS has been configured to automatically just directly point to Squarespace, that Squarespace has taken over the management of this config, but the responsibility for the domain renewal is my responsibility. And also the registration settings on here, if I didn't happen to project this, because I don't consider any of these details here confidential or private, like privacy protection is on, right? So earlier I ran who is lizthegray.com, right? So what you can see here is that Google has paid for, as part of the domain registration fee, just a automatic contact privacy registration. So that's super nice, and I think that it's really cool. Later on, when I live demo stuff, I will be also live demoing how to migrate things off of Cloudflare or off of any domain registration provider onto your chosen domain registration provider, but the steps are more or less the same. So whether it be me showing how to move from Gandhi to Google Domains, or from Two Cows or Hover to Google Domains, like either way, it's about the same process. So we'll go through what that looks like. So basically, what you might want to do there, right, is hypothetically, let me pull open my Hover config over here. So here's my Hover config. And what I'm going to do is, let's suppose that I want to migrate these two domains that are moving over the soonest. I will have to obscure part of my screen here when it actually shows the code, because that could be used to hijack my domain. But essentially what you do is I'm going to take ugcs.net and ugcs.org over. So what I'm going to do is, let's just move one at a time. So I'm going to, holy goodness, 1749. Yeah, Hover doesn't necessarily have the best prices. Let's fix that. So I'm going to disable transfer lock. And oh, by the way, this address here, yeah, this is 10 years old. Again, like, please do not harass the very nice, lovely people who live there. So I have just turned transfer lock off. So now what I'm going to go do over here is, inside of Google Domains, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say transfer in. And I'm going to type in, I'm moving ugcs.net. So it's going to think about it for a second. So it says, yes, it's nlocked. So enter the authorization code. So over here, it's going to offer me the option to retrieve the authorization code. I'm just going to slip off screen for a second and do that. So retrieve authorization code, copy, and paste, continue. And now I'm going to hide that by refreshing the page so the authorization code doesn't show. Okay, so now we've gotten to the next setting. So I'm just going to copy and let Google manage my DNS settings and set the DNS to empty. And I'm going to, wow, that's a lot cheaper, 12 bucks instead of 17. I guess I was being ripped off. So we're going to proceed to checkout, and it's just going to use my standard information. So now that is being currently transferred in. So it'll show under the pending entries. And it says, ask the registrar to release ugcs.net. So over here, actually, we might run into a snag in that I don't actually have access to the email address that it has as current contact info. Unfortunately, because the former admins of the computer science club at my old college have stopped handling their email forwarding super well. So in the worst case, like, it defaults to yes. It just may take some time if you no longer have access to the confirmation email. So that's the process of setting something up for inbound transfer. It's really super easy. Takes like 3 clicks, and you can get the thing swapped over. So that's what to do if you're kind of doing a consumer type setup. If you are using something that's a little bit more advanced, if you are running a commercial website, you might want, instead of Google Domains, to use like a Amazon managed domain record and domain registrar. And that's fine. I think that just is a little bit more complex because they're expecting you to interact with those systems via API call, via Terraform, via kind of machine mechanisms. So why do I go so hard in on Google Domains? I think the answer is it's tied to my Google account, and Google offers advanced protection. So let me just show you what that looks like. All right, so one of the important things is Google offers advanced protection program. I really strongly recommend anyone who might be targeted by an organization like KiwiFarms registered for advanced protection, because it forces you to security key only. You can't get SMS phished. And even if you could, if you also co-locate your SMS provider, for instance, Google Fi or Google Voice, someone literally cannot break in without breaking through advanced protection first. So that kind of stops a lot of attacks in their tracks. So when I've been a critic of Google in many other ways, but I think that pragmatically for me, this is the best decision that I can make to really make sure that this is the kind of one fortress that I defend, instead of having to defend a bunch of different things that may be subject to SIM hijacking and all of those things. So when I put all of these things also behind Google domains, that means that someone is not going to be able to tamper with my domains without getting into my Google account, which is going to be challenging for them. Okay, so that's kind of the domain registration piece, which is one of many important pieces of how we think about hosting a website. The next piece, besides kind of demonstrating that you own the domain, is routing that domain where you want it to go. So for the purposes of routing that domain where you want to go, as I said earlier, if you already have a domain, let's go to one of my active domains, right? Like for instance, over here, lizthegray.com, right? Like this one is managed through Squarespace, so I didn't have to touch anything. And Google runs the name servers for me. Although I do have the option to provide my own custom name servers, I don't know why you would do that, right? Like, yes, there are providers like ZoneEdit that I've used before for this, but that was in the era before domain registrars just started bundling DNS for free. If someone manages to get Google DNS servers offline, like there's a whole lot left of the internet that's also going to be broken. So I'm not super worried about someone trying to denial of service my domain servers, as long as they're living with Squarespace, or if they're living with Google, right, or some other major, large, reputable provider, that is sufficient defense against denial of service for me. If you do need to manage where things route, one of the things that you can do, so I'm going to go back to one of the domains that I do custom route. So over here, what you can see is under the DNS settings, we have a number of DNS settings that have been programmatically set up for routing of SoundMind to Google and Google Workspace. So that's automatically managed for me by Google. But for everything else, what we've chosen to do here is we've chosen to manually manage the paths that these things point to. So we say of SoundMind always is going to route to the backend individual web host that we use, kind of our origin server for all of the content served on ofsoundmind.com. So I mentioned earlier, right, like that the of SoundMind informational website is served off of our IP, but actually is proxied over to GitHub. But there are other services that we operate, such as we do have a roster that keeps track of, who all the characters in our Eve Corp are. So what I'll be doing later today, I think, is on stream, I'll be hardening this by putting this behind a web application firewall. Right now, this is just directly exposed to the internet, though. So basically, anything that you want to kind of manage as a custom record, these are things that you can manually enter via Google Domains. There's also the ability to export or import your records. If you have more than, 10 records, you probably don't want to be typing those in by hand, but that's okay. Kind of your providers should be able to handle that situation for you. And for more advanced use cases, if you're in the Amazon ecosystem, use Route 53, actually keep an entire zone file and point to whatever Route 53 domain servers that Route 53 provides. Similarly, Google does have a product called Google Cloud DNS, and you could kind of batch upload all and manage via software infrastructure as code all of your DNS records. But yeah, for the love that all is good, please do not try to run your own DNS servers. Basically, Bind has been hilariously insecure for many years, and Bind is still kind of that standard. And I ran my own DNS servers for ugcs.caltech.edu for many years, and it was a pain. We had to deal with security breaches. We had to deal with accidentally breaking everything. All the hosted providers can handle it just much better than you can. You don't have to, right? Like if you're already trusting someone with your domain registration, you may as well trust them with running your DNS servers as well. Okay, so let's talk about the next important piece, which is making sure that you get that padlock in the upper left-hand corner, because you don't want someone who is accessing your website to kind of wind up disclosing any payloads, any contents of what they're sending to or receiving from your site, even if it is a static site, even if there's nothing sensitive there. Like, yes, you will leak information to your ISP if you're accessing the site about what domain name you're accessing. But it's a general best practice all across the web to make sure that everything is always secured. So it is true that, Cloudflare says, we provide a free SSL certificate service, like as if it's some big advantage. It's really not. It turns out that there is this provider called Let's Encrypt. Let's Encrypt is pretty great. So if I go to Let's Encrypt, basically they are a nonprofit certificate authority that is well trusted, that is accepted by every single browser. And the cool thing that they do is they continuously validate the status of your SSL certificates. And if you are self-hosting with your own web servers, as we do for ofsoundmind.com, they basically have a mechanism that automatically publishes the right DNS records that give you known good SSL configurations that will make sure that your that your SSL labs scores are good. So if I type this in, it'll take a while to run. We'll just set this running in the background. But these settings were automatically generated by Let's Encrypt. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to handle the automatic renewal. These are all things that are just automatically handled for me by running the correct domain. And yes, Caddy is awesome. I have not yet had the occasion to deploy it in production, but I hear it is so much better than Nginx. Yeah, the way that all this works is essentially that Let's Encrypt basically publishes the DNS record by poking the Google Domains endpoint to automatically tell Let's Encrypt that you actually own the domain. And then Let's Encrypt will issue you a certificate that is short-lived, and then it will automatically update on the fly. So really, really cool stuff. This will finish loading in a second. Then meanwhile, what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to actually come over here, and let's have a look at my Nginx config. So if we look over here, basically, oh, that's interesting. Okay, there's my Let's Encrypt config. Okay, somewhere here, armor, where does this live? Ah, okay. Yep, so what we can see here is there's basically a whole bunch of stuff that is automatically run by the Let's Encrypt daemon that handles the kind of automatic renewal of this stuff. So again, I don't have to worry about it, and yeah, as I'm showing you, I've got an A+ security rating from Qualys Labs. It's great. But yeah, the other options are, again, if you're a large enterprise, just use the Amazon certificate manager or the Google certificate manager. Don't use Let's Encrypt, right? Like, you just plug into whatever infrastructure as code facilities that your cloud provider operates. Okay, so I think that kind of gets to the basic security pieces of how do you keep control of your domain? How do you make sure that no one can get your domain offline? How do you make sure that connections are secure? But I think that one of the main reasons why people adopt Cloudflare is because, you know, Cloudflare promises to reduce your cost if you're serving large media files, or if you are otherwise having people access your website on a regular basis, or if for some reason you're afraid of someone, not like maliciously, but kind of someone just scraping your website to fetch all the content on it. And to that, I think the basic answer is that you're not necessarily getting the deal that you think you are out of the free caching service that Cloudflare is offering you. Like, yes, there are horror stories of the, you know, $10,000 AWS bill from someone who operated a service without any caching layer in front of it. But you just need a caching layer. It doesn't have to be something fancy like Fastly or Cloudflare. Just the basic things that come with your cloud provider are usually going to be good enough. All you need to do is to make sure that you rewrite any kind of image requests or anything that might be more expensive than just serving a simple HTML web page, that you serve that off of your CDN. So over here, I am going to, for demonstration purposes, just poke around what my employer's config is. You know, this is just the most handy example that I have, and it doesn't disclose anything anything that I wouldn't stream anyway. So if I look at Cloudfront, which is the offering from Amazon, AWS Cloudfront, do not confuse Cloudfront and Cloudflare. Cloudfront, good. Cloudflare, bad. Okay, we got it? So what Cloudfront does basically is, yes, it's a little bit more setup than Cloudflare doing it automatically. But basically, what you do is you create, you specify, what's the origin domain, and you want it to be something different than your main domain that you're using for serving your web page on. You want it to be something for resources. And again, you probably want to turn on the bells and whistles like Origin Shield. And assuming that these are static assets that are not going to change, right? Let's suppose, let me show you what an example of this looks right? So if I go to lizthegray.com, right, this image, I'm sure it gets loaded like a million times, right? If I open that in a new tab, you can see indeed that this is being served off of images.squarespacecdn.com, right? I wonder what that is. So let's find out what that is. And aha, right? It says images squarespacecdn.com is a CNAME for Squarespace map fastly.net, right? There you go. So that is in fact an example of, okay, Squarespace in fact uses Fastly. I don't have to go yell at Fastly to stop using Cloudflare. Great, right? But either way, the kind of thing that you're doing is you're generating a unique path corresponding to the content that will change if the content ever changes. So the file name, so it's content addressed. Any changes to the content will result in a new URL path, which makes it so you don't have to handle cache expiry. You'll just naturally fall out of the cache if someone stops asking for it because you change the path that points to it. So that's just kind of the mechanism, basically. All these things, basically, you can leave as the defaults. And again, you want it to have an SSL certificate. So what this does is basically it makes it so instead of paying the object retrieval cost to get your images or JavaScript or whatever kind of large blobs off of S3 directly, Cloudfront will fetch the copy one time, the first time that it's accessed, and it'll keep it in the cache and it'll serve it both at reduced cost for retrieving from storage, as well as reduced cost to talk to the public internet. Because AWS will charge you something like 8 cents per gigabyte to transmit data to the public internet, but the costs are lower when it's from an existing Amazon point of presence that is closer to the web browser where someone might be using it. So yeah, basically some modifications to your config and to your deployment pipeline may be needed, or if you're operating a static site and you disregarded everything that I said about using GitHub or using using WordPress or Squarespace. If you must host it yourself, put all of your assets into an S3 bucket, give that S3 bucket to CloudFront, make sure every file in that bucket is uniquely named such that you can change the name if the content changes. That's pretty much it. And that will save you enough cost that it will make your website not too prohibitive to run. The other important thing that I'm going to highlight here is I would make sure to always set up billing alerts. So if you have, let's see, where is this? I'm not going to show our Amazon bill live. That is confidential. But there are features in the Amazon billing console, there are features in similarly Google Cloud billing console for setting limits on your account so that you will immediately get alerted if for some reason someone is denial of servicing you, repeatedly fetching content that isn't being served by CloudFront, or that CloudFront is serving, but it's, even at, a decrease like 0.3 cents per gigabyte, you're still like, you're still paying way too much. You'll get an alert, you'll be able to shut it off. So I think that goes to the other point, which is that, yes, denial of service attacks could cost you money, but they also cost the person engaging the denial of service attack money as well. And in many cases, it may just make sense to lay low and let the denial of service attack pass rather than try to throw money at keeping it online. And in the worst case, if you did what I said earlier and keep a static copy of your site on GitHub or on Squarespace, you can always just flip your domain settings and flip those settings to serve from those providers. And then they will absorb the cost of the attack, and you can always flip it back to something that you can update and control later on, right? There's kind of not this, binary yes-no of is my site online or at all or not. Instead, it's this question of to which degree is my service degraded if someone is trying to go after me. There's also the fact that when you are subject to denial of service attack, at least the first couple of times, like, the people at Amazon are reasonable. If you can show that you followed good account security practices, right? Like, this is not, I published it, my Amazon IM key and someone started running crypto miners, right? Like, as long as it's something where you followed all the best practices, you configured Cloudfront, you configured your Amazon application load balancers, they tend to be reasonably forgiving as a one-off event for forgiving excess bandwidth bills. Don't rely on it, but it is something that you can avail yourself of. So I think that brings us to the last point about denial of service protection, right? Like, let's suppose that you already have a cache in place. Let's suppose that you really, really want to keep your site online at all costs. I don't think that this is true for hobbyist use cases. So the main thing to do is to just use what's built into the platform already. Instead of doing the thing that I currently have configured with ofsoundmind.com, where it just goes directly to the backend, what I might want to do is I might want to configure, say, roster.ofsoundmind.com. That might want to go to a load balancer. Load balancers in both Amazon and Google Cloud have built-in web application firewalls. It's called AWS Shield Standard in Amazon, and it's called Google Cloud Armor for the Google Cloud Load Balancer. It's built in for free. If you are a large enterprise and you're worried about this, both Amazon and Google have offerings, but they start at, for Amazon, $3,000 a month, for Google, $6,000 a month, respectively. So you get what you pay for, right? Like, it does mean that with Google, if you're paying the $6,000 a month, you have a direct phone line to reach premium support at Google, and they can actually get hold of my friend Damien, who is the lead denial of service engineer at Google, and Damien is amazing. Highly recommend. So, you can get similar levels of denial of service protection as you could from Cloudflare out of Google, right? Like, because let's face it, Cloudflare may serve a lot of clients, but like, there are a lot of people who try to denial service Google all the time, and they do not succeed, right? Like, so Google is a very credible denial of service provider when the rubber meets the road. So I'll actually be working through this, in a little bit. Let me just pull this tab open so I have it. And I'll also paste the link into, let's see, catalog, access denied, make sure you're signed in. Okay, I want to sign in. Signing into Google Cloud with my personal account. Trick Labs terms of service, sure. Okay, so let's see whether that loads. Interesting. Oh, that didn't work the first time. Maybe I have to load it. Google Cloud Armor tutorial. So I swear I was dry running this morning. So Cloud Armor security policy overview. How did I get to that? Okay, we'll figure this out later, but there is a free quick lab that you can complete that offers free Google Cloud credits for you to actually try out the standard web application firewall built into the Google Cloud Load Balancer. Okay, there are maybe other niche uses of more advanced features that are, I will be clear, not present on the Cloudflare free tier. So Cloudflare workers are not on the free tier. And fortunately, that is just a straight substitution for AWS Lambda or AWS Lambda at Edge or Google Cloud Functions or Fastly Compute at Edge. There are a wide variety of competitors to Cloudflare workers. They may have different price points, but there is kind of a price associated with not doing business with people who serve the unsavory scum of the internet. Finally, one thing I wanted to mention is, if you cannot, for whatever reason, migrate off of Cloudflare, if it's too much work, I'm going to point out a couple of weaknesses I think I've spotted in the Cloudflare free plan. So one of them is, where is this? Cloudflare free plan pricing. Here we go. So the Cloudflare free plan has some interesting attributes I'm going to point out. Namely, the Cloudflare free plan offers unlimited, or to some degree, unlimited static content caching. So if you happen to host any kind of especially large videos, and you happen to set something to fetch them about once a day, that might run up Cloudflare's bandwidth costs. If you happen to, for instance, they have this thing where you can set up custom rules for routing traffic. If you happened to put a bunch of wildcards or regexes in there, regexes tend to be hideously expensive to evaluate at scale. So throw some extra regexes in there. And they also have the ability to provision custom subdomains on the free tier, up to 100 subdomains. Make sure you avail yourself of all of them, right? You want to take advantage of the full free tier capability. And then the other thing to do is to set Cloudflare's security settings to be as paranoid as possible, so that they're running the exhaustive, analyzing browser JavaScript behavior patterns across as many of the visitors to your site as possible, rather than only on the ones that are suspicious. So those are all things that you can do to drain Cloudflare's resources if you are making use of their free plan. So that's basically kind of the set of technical recommendations. I'm going to really quickly see if I can pop open my browser history and see how I got to the Google Cloud Skills Boost configuration thing. Okay. I think I have found how I got there. Yes, okay. So I found how I got there. Let's pop this open. So I will also drop this link over here. So here's a direct link for being able to access the Google Cloud Self-Paced Lab, for being able to configure cloud load balancers and firewalling. So we'll give that a little play maybe at the end, although I might stop and start the stream just to disconnect the YouTube videos and also give our captioner a little bit of a break, since this material is adequately covered by kind of a description on screen such that it probably doesn't need captions to go with it. So in the meantime, let's quickly wrap things up for the interactive part of the stream, for the talky part of the stream. And let's talk about the soft skills part. So what if your company is a client of Cloudflare and you're an enterprise client, right? Like, none of these things I say apply to you because, yes, you already know that that Fastly exists. What if you have WebAssembly or custom rule workloads or other things that you'd need to port over to Varnish to work with Fastly? So the good news is anyone who is writing custom Cloudflare rules probably, right, the verbs and the nouns, they're the same even if the technology is slightly different. So your team of people who work with integrating Cloudflare into your environment could also just as well work with integrating Fastly into your environment. So the challenge is, yes, there is a technical migration, but it's not like there's any missing pieces that are present in Cloudflare, not present in Fastly. So instead, the argument is kind of, what is the business case for doing this migration? I think, number one, having evaluated that choice lets you choose based on price when your contract renewal comes up, right? You don't want to be locked into one provider forever. It never hurts to try out the alternatives and see what's out there. The other thing is, as I've been talking about, there are consequences. There are kind of issues with having your website associated with Cloudflare and being backed by Cloudflare. And what you're going to be seeing from Keffels, Clara, and myself and others over the coming weeks is that we're going to be reaching out to everyone who uses Cloudflare services and asking them, are you okay with having your content cached on the very same servers that are also being used to serve the graphic videos of the Christchurch mosque shooting, of the Buffalo shooting, right? There is a brand reputation risk associated with it, and we are getting coverage for these for these problems, whether it be in Axios, which is one of the main business publications and most commonly read business publications in the world, whether it be in the NewsStack, which is a very popular cloud computing newsletter and editorial and journalism site, right? So this stream of things is just going to keep coming, and you are going to start facing questions about why you're still doing business with Cloudflare. So I don't think that being associated by reputation with Cloudflare is a good thing for your business. And even further, right, like, let's be real, furries and queer people, we do run a substantial amount of the internet. So if your employees have to come to work and interact with Cloudflare as part of their jobs, like, especially now that there's this awareness that this is happening and going on, how are your employees going to feel about doing business with a company that is shamelessly refusing to back down, that is shamelessly saying we are okay with offering services to white supremacists no matter the violence they cause. We are okay with offering service to people who are advocating for the eradication of trans people. That having a supplier that denies the human rights of your own employees in the service of this misguided principle of libertarianism and the marketplace of ideas, that's just not going to fly at some point. That people make business and job decisions based off of what tools they'll be working with. So evaluating options and alternatives to Cloudflare helps you ensure that you have the opportunity to switch to something that is both cheaper and more ethical. And the thing that I'll also say is that if you're working at Cloudflare, it's not clear to me based on the behavior that I've heard about or seen over the past week that your executives, your employer, care about you if you have a backbone, if you have ethics. I would encourage you to start looking for a new job. I am happy to put my network to work helping you find other positions elsewhere that will pay comfortably. Please don't let your labor be used for unethical purposes, and don't let your leadership just consistently ignore you when you complain about the ethics of what your labor is being used for. At the end of the day, if you're maintaining one of the Cloudflare caching servers, you are actively playing a role in keeping the images of the Christchurch shooting online. That you are actively playing a role in keeping online this group that is working together to exterminate transgender people. So I admit, I went into the beginning of this week hoping that I wouldn't need to get to this point. I was hoping that maybe after the first stream, when I talked about the harm that KiwiFarms has caused to me personally, as well as to hundreds of other victims, that would be enough to sway their hearts. I was hoping that by the second stream, when we talked about all of the ways in which Cloudflare had been complicit and had a chance to change over the years and didn't, and that the best time to come clean is, many years ago, but the second best time is to stop doing future harm. I was hoping that would make a difference, and unfortunately it did not. So Cloudflare does not appear to be listening to us when we're just telling our stories. So we need to go after their bottom line. We need to empower employees that want to fight and resist internally. So regardless of whether you have existing footprint on Cloudflare, don't start new projects there even if you already have contracts. Start new projects on another CDN. If you are on Cloudflare, work on your migration plan. And tell your friends not to use Cloudflare. Share this video series with them. Share those news articles I linked with them. Tell your friends not to work at Cloudflare. Because at this point, Cloudflare is in the same place on my list as Palantir is, as far as places that have demonstrated that their purpose is so antithetical to building a better internet, no matter what they say on the tin, that it does not make sense to deliver your labor to them and then beg for scraps of their attention when they have no intention of actually listening to you. So this is the third video in the series I had planned. I was hoping to not get here. I guess we're going to have a fourth video. There will be a bonus episode next week or the week after. I need to figure out how to manage my burnout. But I'm going to be trying to work with TechJess, formerly of the Blizzard workers of ABK. And we're going to talk about how to organize in your workplace if you are at Cloudflare, even while you're shopping for a new job. How do you organize? How do you walk out? What might unionizing look like for you? Because at the end of the day, the bosses can't do the job by themselves. It's your labor that's making this happen. But all of this has been really stressful and triggering, so I'm going to need at least a few days break, certainly through the middle of next week. I'm going to keep on doing media articles and interviews. You're going to keep on seeing me hammer this point home with every publication that people read among the set of people who make decisions about which CDN contract they sign. So keep up the fight. If you work on a platform team, write a note to your Cloudflare rep on Monday. If you work with a platform team, start those conversations with your platform team if you discover that you are using Cloudflare about what it might look like for you to switch off and why it's important. And if you do know technical people at a site that you use, talk to those people about getting an effort to drop Cloudflare started there. I don't want you to hound the customer service reps 2 degrees out, right? Yes, it might make sense to file complaints with the Cloudflare support line saying that they're supporting that there's an abuse complaint. On the other hand, be aware they're going to forward that on to KiwiFarms. But, basically, I think that it is fair game to file complaints with Cloudflare itself. I don't think it's fair game to file complaints with the people who operate websites who are just in the customer support department where they happen to be using Cloudflare. I think there's much higher leverage activities to do that utilize our networks as technologists to work together to find better, more ethical solutions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start taking some questions from the chat. And then after that, we might go ahead and work through this code lab together. And I might take the opportunity to go ahead and get roster of soundmind.com put behind a load balancer and therefore have it automatically benefit from the denial service protections that Google Cloud Load Balancer offers. So one question that I see is, what are the alternatives to using Cloudflare images for generating links for end users to upload to? I think that you might have to glue this together a little bit yourself, but essentially you'll want a application that handles rate limiting, downloading, and then that uploads to the S3 bucket. And then you can just pick directly out of the S3 bucket into Cloudflare, right? So the kind of URL substitution of the S3 bucket to the Cloudflare URL is pretty straightforward. The main challenge is, honestly, like, I'm not sure that I would fully trust any service that let, arbitrary users upload whatever, right? Like, I think that a lot of that business logic is something you're going to want to build yourself anyways to make sure that people are known to you when they're uploading things, that you don't accidentally wind hosting child sexual abuse imagery. Cool. Other questions? People are talking about various domains and email hosts. If you don't trust Google with running your with hosting your email, that's fine, right? The Fastmail is fine, but still, Google domains might be a reasonable place to keep your domain, and then set the MX record to Fastmail. The good news is Advanced Protection Program is available to everyone. It used to be only personal, but it's been expanded to corporate, which is very, very nice. Cool. Other questions from the chat. Let's have a look. What to do for people at larger companies that may have Cloudflare as a vendor and it isn't necessarily an easy effort to migrate? I think basically you start by saying new efforts go on to a competitor like Fastly, right? You might start doing an evaluation of, does Fastly support all of the different rule sets that you expect out of Cloudflare? The other thing is to really kind of make the business case to your executives that there is reputational risk associated with having your bytes sit right alongside the images of mass shooting. Are there smaller size DDoS proxy hosts without using Google or Amazon? Honestly, the problem is that the larger the scale of the provider, the better protection they're going to be able to provide. So therefore, if you're looking for something that is comparable to Cloudflare in terms of its comprehensiveness, you're really looking at Google or Amazon or Fastly. Recommendations for alternatives to Cloudflare Stream. It depends on whether you need it to be a public video or a private video. For public videos, certainly Twitch does a fine job for me. There's also the option of Vimeo. There's also the option of YouTube. And indeed, Fastly does have video caching and streaming services. When you pay for a Google product, in general, you are not the product, right? Like you are an active paying customer. They are incented to provide you with good customer service. The thing that underpins all of this is just the same authentication mechanisms, which I think are really best in class. As Reiking is pointing out, there are shady DDoS protection shops, and one of them, in fact, is a Russian provider that KiwiFarms itself is using, right? So the key thing is, if you're looking to avoid any provider that KiwiFarms might use, then you probably want to be on one of the main reputable providers that has already kicked KiwiFarms off. Cool. Well, I'll go ahead and start working through some of this, and And I'll actually just keep it all as one part of the stream. I think this is fine. So what I'm going to do over here is I am going to go over to my Google Cloud Console, and we'll set up a brand new load balancer. By the way, if you are, where's I going with this? Yeah, so here's my project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you right now that I have a single VM called Pepperoni. But right now, I do not have any instance groups, and in particular, I'm going to have to go over to the Google Cloud Load Balancer rather than Compute Engine to get the, I hate this. Right, so if I go to Load Balancing under Network Services, so I'm going to set up a brand new load balancer, and it is going to be a new level 7 load balancer from my internet to my services. And it is going to be a global HTTPS load balancer, even though I am single region. So this is going to be roster LB. And so I'm horribly imaginative with my names. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. Let me share my screen. There we go. So we're going to include HTTPS, and it is IPv4 ephemeral, and I need to tell it, hey, by the way, I control ofsoundmind.com, and I'm going to create a Google managed certificate for start at ofsoundmind.com. Oh, it does not support wildcard domains. That's fine. So we'll just create a one for roster. So now that I've done that, and it's got a automatically managed thing, Google happens to know that I already control ofsoundmind.com, so it'll just automatically issue that to me. So that's done. And then on the backend configuration, we're going to create a backend service, which is going to be called Pepperoni Backend. And this is going to be a HTTPS service named port HTTPS. And we are going to add we might need a new instance group. So let's handle that bit first. That is a little annoying. So we'll just run over here and create a new instance group. So if I go back over to my VMs, so I'm going to create a new instance group. Oh, interesting. This is trying to set up auto-scaling. I actually just want a nmanaged instance group. There we go. Okay, so now that's correct. So I want to feed it my existing VM, hopefully. There we go. Okay, and now I want to... Okay, I think that should do it. Okay, so now there is a group called Pepperoni. So once that finishes creating, I should be able to go over here and create a backend service, which is backed by a single instance group on port HTTPS, and the instance group is, okay, pepperoni-g is now up, or it should be if there is eventual consistency. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to refresh this and hope it didn't lose my config. Okay, it lost my config, that's fine. Roster, port HTTPS, ephemeral, IP address 443. We already created the thing there. Okay, so now backend services. So create a new backend service. This would probably help if I wow, it leaked my old, that's really bad. Why are you leaking my old my old Canadian postcode? That actually could be really bad. Fortunately, that is not where I currently live, but that's an embarrassing whoopsie. That name auto completes to the zip code / postcode that's been saved in Google. Well, that was lucky. Okay, so we're going to call this, instead of where I used to live, we're going to call it roster BG. This is an instance group serving HTTPS on port HTTPS. Instance group is pepperoni on port 443. And here, it's just one click to enable CDN. And it says cache static content, and it'll automatically detect, which is pretty great. And I'm going to say I want a health check, pepperoni health, and this is going to do a TCP on port, I want it to do just an HTTPS on port 443, and request that, and not log, and yep, that looks all good. And this allows me to set optional Cloud Armor backend security policies. So if I came under denial of service attack, I would set a backend or edge security policy, but I'm not going to do that. And I'm also going to ignore all of these custom CDN options. So now I've created this, and now I can review and finalize. So ephemeral 443 roster. Yep. So that all looks good. Oh, so roster LB. So now I have created this, and the next thing that I'm going to need to do then is I'm going to need to make sure that this has an entry in Cloud DNS, and then I'm going to need to set a CNAME from Google domains over here to Google Cloud Domains Cloud DNS, and that should do the appropriate thing. So this is currently in the process of creating. And once it finishes creating, right, like, so this is literally as simple as it is, right? Like to go from having a single VM that's hosting your services to properly backing it with a CDN and with denial of service protection. Like, again, it's much, much easier if you're not hosting any of these things yourself, if your application is just pure Jamstack and you can just take it to Netlify. But in this case, this is a little bit more of what we might call a legacy service, and that's okay. So yeah. Okay, so this is up and running. So what I want to do is I want to create a Cloud DNS. Let's see, so how do I configure this? Okay, so it's complaining not healthy. So I might need to spend some time off stream debugging, like, why is this not healthy? But it seems to have a working IP address. The other thing that I might want to do after this is I might want to change the IP address of pepperoni so it's not a publicly visible origin, because I want the only public interface to this to be through the load balancer. But these are all varying tidying up things that I could do. The main thing is just to demonstrate that these features come built in out of the box, and what I can do with this thing is I can set traffic policy details, right? I can say I want to edit this to add advanced configuration for custom denial of service rules. So yeah. Can you use the Google Load Balancer to load balance connections to a physical server you have? Yep, there's no restriction why it has to live with Google Cloud as the backend. It just happens to be easier to do so. So if you're trying to protect a couple of servers downstairs in a server rack, you might have to set up some kind of peering or VPC tunneling to get your physical servers to peer inside of the Google Cloud VPC. But that should be pretty straightforward to do. Cool. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. Really appreciate you spending the time to have a chat with me about how to practically migrate off of Cloudflare. So hopefully this gives you some guidance as to what you can do if you operate a hobbyist site, what you can do if you're kind of a sole practitioner as an IT professional working in an org, And if you work in a larger org, number one, write to your Cloudflare rep, say that you're not happy with being co-hosted with with videos of shootings and with harassment of trans people. If that doesn't work, make migration plans. And yeah, I guess I will be seeing some of you, those who are interested in supporting Cloudflare employees who are unhappy and who are unionizing and organizing. We'll see you on the next stream in a week or two. But otherwise, have a good night. Please keep the pressure up. And I'm sad that it has come to this. Not just Cloudflare dropped KiwiFarms, but dropped Cloudflare. Good night.